समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The recently held Islamabad talks between US and Iran have ended without an outcome, and Donald Trump has announced a new blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, this time around only for ships exiting or reaching the Iranian ports, a decision that had instilled a new uncertainty in the global maritime trade. So, what is the status of the current war in the Gulf? Is it ending or escalating? On one plane, the war persists with unabated brutality, especially in Lebanon. On another, it appears momentarily paused under a fragile ceasefire between United States and Iran, which has not really been extended. And at yet another level, it is about keeping energy supplies to the world open, anxiously tracking the prices of Brent crude and natural gas amid deteriorating investor confidence. Now, with some actors talking and others escalating, the conflict defies linear analysis. And particularly about the ceasefire. Is the ceasefire partial or substantive? Will it hold off fray? And what, if anything, can be expected after the Islamabad talks have failed? Now, two developments must be highlighted before I go further. First, the Pakistan-facilitated talks between the United States and Iran have failed, but are most likely to see the next phase, a diplomatically significant moment for Pakistan, regardless of the outcome. Because there is no outcome right now. Washington and Tehran have articulated and pushed divergent interpretations. Iran says it will continue with uranium enrichment, while the United States maintains that no such concessions have been made, a point announced by J.D. Vance after the talks concluded. Now, the Strait of Hormuz has gotten complicated, and the fate of Lebanon also remains uncertain and divergent. As of now, there seems to be no talks between Israel and Lebanon, as many were hoping until a few days ago. And I think before I go further, I have to talk about Lebanon a little bit more. There had been a proposal by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for direct talks with Lebanon, the first such overture in history, following an unprecedented Israeli bombing campaign escalated against Hezbollah last week. Hezbollah, Iran's most formidable proxy against Israel, had so far been operating as a state within a state in Lebanon. It now appears to be fighting its last war. Remember that the US too has been launching strikes on Shia militias in Iraq. Taken together, the regional dynamics of Levant might change forever, and it is in everybody's interest to meet and talk. However, Israel insists that no ceasefire will happen with Hezbollah before the talks, a condition that has not gone through, and therefore we ended up pretty much where we began. And what about the Strait of Hormuz? It continues to exist in a state of paradox, simultaneously open and closed, selectively blockaded by Iran so far, and now by United States. Now, Iran's insistence on imposing the selective transit fee, a toll of $2 million per barrel, has been rejected by the US and the Gulf Cooperation Council, and yet some ships belonging to Iran's friendly nations or bound to friendly nations have continued to pass. However, in an unexpected turn of events, CENTCOM has now announced a blockade of those ships, and one doesn't really know how the scenario will play out. The consequences have been far-reaching. As we are speaking, hundreds of oil tankers and dozens of LNG carriers have remained stalled, alongside dozens of cargo ships carrying critical items, including nearly 2 million tons of fertilizer. Now, there is no clear timeline for the resolution of this logistical paralysis. For the GCC, then, the implications remain profound. While they have been right in demanding a seat at the negotiating table, for instance in Pakistan, their concerns extend much beyond immediate de-escalation or partial ceasefire or talks. The weaponization and uncertainty around Hormuz and the asymmetric targeting of energy infrastructure have fundamentally altered the region's security and financial calculus. Any sustainable resolution would require not merely a cessation of hostilities, but constructing a new deterrence architecture, one that integrates diversified energy infrastructure. And here I mean the newly activated pipelines such as the East-West pipeline, the Fujairah pipeline, and many more, along with a range of cost-effective military capabilities. And here I mean the drones. Now, it is increasingly evident that Middle East today embodies a paradox. It is somewhat stable and functioning, and yet more unstable than ever due to entrenched uncertainties. So there is no big picture as yet except speculation. For now, only meaningful analysis lies in analyzing the trajectories ahead. What may emerge from these interim negotiations, what are the motivations of those involved, and whether they hold the potential for a sustainable equilibrium. Now, much has been said about Pakistan's role in facilitating or mediating these talks. But is there more than meets the eye? Now, there is some logic as to why United States and Iran agreed to talk in the first place, however loosely, to agree to a ceasefire. For both, the incentives were immediate and pragmatic. For DC, the move was shaped as much by markets as by military considerations. Donald Trump's rhetoric to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age and growing existential threats to Iranian civilization had pushed the markets to the brink and had also had other consequences, particularly on oil and gas prices. Perpetual disorder required some restraint and a breather. Now, Brent crude, which had consistently traded above $100 per barrel after 28th February, which is when the war began, fell sharply to $92 following the ceasefire announcement, before stabilizing in the mid to high $90 range and again shooting past $100 after the Islamabad talks failed. Also, did you notice who all comprised of the US delegation led by J.D. Vance? It had Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, both real estate developers. Jared, who's also Trump's son-in-law, does have commercial stakes in the Middle East and therefore is seen everywhere, whether it's the Board of Peace or the Islamabad talks. Now, for Iran, the motivations have been more pressing. Despite the performative defiance of the IRGC exhibited via social media handles and its resilience, the material costs of the war have been staggering for them as well. The decentralized mosaic of the IRGC has inflicted costs on the US and Israel along with their partners, but has not insulated Iran from damage to its own military and energy infrastructure. The most critical trigger, however, seems to have been Israel's strikes on the South Pars just one day before the announcement of the ceasefire. South Pars gas fields, by the way, are the backbone of Iran's vast domestic energy grid and an asset they share with Qatar. That such strikes occurred despite reported US assurances to the contrary may have motivated IRGC to respond favorably to the possibility of a ceasefire without dropping its uncompromising rhetoric on nuclear enrichment back home. And the results showed how far apart the two sides are on the score issue. Therefore, the initial ceasefire, lacking mutually agreed terms and triggering more questions than furnishing answers, has functioned less as a resolution and more as a pause, an opportunity for both sides to recalibrate while claiming victory. And yet, these conditions alone do not explain Pakistan's emergence as a facilitator. We need to discuss this part because Pakistan is most likely to be a facilitator again at some point. Now, global opinion on this matter has erupted along predictable lines, with competing narratives of role, leverage, and legitimacy. Within India, reactions to Pakistan's role have ranged from apathy to anxiety. But remember that official acknowledgement of the facilitated ceasefire from our Ministry of External Affairs instilled a much required objectivity into the matter. And this brings me once again to analyze whether Pakistan turned a facilitator or a mediator by choice or by compulsion. Now, while skepticism regarding Pakistan's strategic bandwidth to drive a meaningful outcome is understandable, it doesn't quite recognize the extent of its ongoing diplomatic engagement. Islamabad has reportedly been involved in back-channel discussions for over 18 months. Its military elite, mainly Field Marshal Asim Munir, maintains favorable ties with US Central Command, especially General Kurilla, while also mending intel channels with Tehran, with whom Pakistan shares a deep defense cooperation for decades. More importantly, Pakistan's role is shaped by its own security imperatives. What is that? Its relationship with Iran is complex, marked by both cooperation and covert tension. While defense cooperation can be traced back to the aftermath of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and I have written about that earlier, their intelligence agencies have clashed, particularly over Balochistan and Iran-backed Shia proxies recruiting Pakistani Shia mercenaries. Now, this has happened until very recently when both sides bombed each other's territories to contain Pakistan's simmering Baloch separatism. And remember, Baloch do constitute a major part of minorities within Iran as well. And this invisible intel war, as described by British Pakistani expert Kamal Alam in his piece for Rusi, and something he also discussed with me on The Worldview, had continued despite prima facie the strategic cooperation. However, recently the tensions have been diffusing under Asim Munir, whose clear strategic communication with Iran has helped create a win-win diplomatic channel between Iran and Pakistan instead of a lose-lose scenario. Now, this in turn has strengthened Pakistan's position as a dependable actor for Iran, while also creating favorable conditions and motivations for Pakistan to protect its stake in Iran's war. Also, remember that Shia militias backed by the IRGC have recruited Shia mercenaries from Pakistan in this ongoing war as well, which does become an added concern for Pakistan to address. And one way to keep such channels open is to offer itself as a facilitator of talks. Simultaneously, Pakistan must balance its relations with Saudi Arabia, with whom it has recently signed a security pact. Now, avoiding direct entanglement in a Saudi-Iran military confrontation is a strategic priority for Pakistan. Its past role in facilitating back-channel dialogues between Tehran and Riyadh further and rightfully so reinforced this positioning. However, alongside the failure of the latest Islamabad talks, Pakistan has sent about a dozen fighter aircraft, mainly F-16s, and has deployed reportedly 13,000 troops in Saudi Arabia. Now, in this context, Pakistan's role and attempts at mediation so far are less an act of strategic altruism, but one of strategic survival that, to its credit, it has managed quite deftly. It possesses the requisites, that is, strategic and defense ties, intelligence linkages, a relevant geography, and incentives to create a platform for dialogue. That it has done so is significant, even if the talks have ended without any outcomes, because it was expected. The thing to watch out for is that Pakistan has reasonable reasons to repeat this role later as well. Coming back to the broader war, however, I would conclude by saying that it continues to unfold asymmetrically. In the talks, the United States remains focused on Iran's nuclear program and finding enriched uranium, but is now blockading the Strait of Hormuz for Iranian ships. Israel, in addition to US objectives, remains committed to a prolonged crushing of Iran-backed proxies, mainly the Hezbollah. The GCC seek a restructured security order, a new deterrent, and states such as Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan navigate the spillover effects of all of this combined. With such divergent priorities, any agreement that does not reconcile these positions, at least to some degree, is likely to remain fragile. And then add to it, the Gulf and the Levant are undergoing a profound transformation in distribution of power, energy infrastructure, and military strategy as well. The contours of this new order haven't become pronounced, but they will differ markedly from the past, and in my opinion, incommensurably so. Though the odds remain slim for now, the world should welcome another round of talks whenever they happen between US or Iran or between Israel and Lebanon, and I'll be back to discuss more of this, so you stay tuned.